record. All right, recording is in progress.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So once again, hi, I'm Parker. I'm president and co-founder of Lititz Chooses Love, who is bringing you this presentation today by the wonderful Kate Parker and MK Stroman. So let me tell you a little bit about them. MK is a licensed social worker and home and school visitor for Lancaster Lebanon Intermediate Unit 13. They completed their undergraduate degree in social work at Elizabethtown College, their master's degree in social work from Millerstown University, and their home and school visitor certification from Widener University. Their professional experience has been primarily focused on urban schools, social work, and high school students who have complex behavioral, familial, and/or academic needs. In the past, they have worked in the School District of Philadelphia and School District of Lancaster. For the last 5 years, they have worked at Lancaster Lebanon Intermediate Unit 13 with transitional age students who are working to secure employment upon graduation. MK is also involved in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at IU 13, providing training and consultation to promote the mental wellness and equity of LGBTQ+ youth in schools. As an openly transgender professional, MK is visibly and vocally involved in local advocacy work related to supporting the LGBTQ+ community. MK's direct work with LGBTQ+ students and their families, along with their personal experience, has made them a known resource in the school system and local community. And Kate Parker is an educational consultant for the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network. She is doctorally trained school psychologist and has experience working in urban, suburban, and rural K-12 schools in Pennsylvania. Her research and professional experience primarily focuses on system-level change initiatives that improve school experiences for all children and families, but especially those from marginalized communities. In her current role, Kate provides training and technical assistance to school district stakeholders across Pennsylvania in the areas of positive behavior and interventions and support, equity, evidence-based behavioral and mental health practices, and dropout prevention. And Kate is also an essential member and also co-founder of Lititz Chooses Love, which is a completely volunteer-run grassroots nonprofit who have been just, growing as fast as anybody could imagine. So we are able to bring you only about 7 months after our creation, this wonderful presentation. So I'm going to let Kate pick it up from there.
Yes, I'm just going to elaborate a little bit on the LCL piece, Parker. Parker works around the clock, as do many of the organizers in LCL, and we, as he shared, are completely volunteer run. We are currently planning so many exciting events and activities and supports for this spring and summer, including our second annual Pride event. So if you find it in your heart to donate or volunteer with us, any way that you want to pitch in and support to help us grow and bring these services to the community, we would really love to partner with you. So our Venmo is on our screen here, and our email address as well. If you're interested in joining us for any of our events in the future, feel free to reach out. And you obviously know how to contact us on Facebook, on Discord. We have a TikTok, we have a YouTube, and we have an Instagram. I think that covers them all. At least those are the only ones that someone of my age are familiar with. There might be more. You would have to talk to some of our younger volunteers for that information. But anyway, let's get started. Oops, I'm on 2 screens here. So again, showing my age, bear with me. Okay, so thank you for joining MK Stroman and I for A Space to Be Yourself, supporting LGBTQ+ youth. If you're just joining us, we did share in the beginning that we're really looking for this to be conversational. Everyone is muted upon entry, but we encourage you to unmute, ask questions. If you have a question that you're not comfortable asking in front of the group, put it in the chat. It will only come to MK Parker and I, and we'll be available to ask those questions for you anonymously. This session is being recorded. We are not going to be sharing our PowerPoint slides. We have a few just to help guide our conversation. You're welcome to take notes. You're also welcome to go back and view the recording if there's anything that you forget. And we will provide a handout at the very end of the presentation. We have a link for you to sign up to receive the handout, which will contain links to a lot of the resources that we'll be highlighting, as well as a couple of takeaway like strategies and ideas. MK, I'm going to turn it over to you for this next one.
Yeah, so Alexander Leon makes a great point when they shared this information a couple years ago, that queer people don't grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult lives is to unpick which parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we've created to protect us. I think it's such a valuable, very loaded paragraph there that they shared, because I couldn't have related to this more, and I think a lot of queer people relate to this as well. A lot of mental health advocacy talks about the fact that LGBTQ individuals, and especially youth, as we'll talk about today, are at such a greater risk for mental health and adverse health effects over the course of their life. But so much of that advocacy and discussion falls short because it's not just inherently that way for queer people. It's that way as a result of how society and our environments that we're in treat us, that causes that risk and adverse health outcomes. So much of what Alexander shares here is just really true, is being able to separate what we've been conditioned to think about ourselves and the parts that we've had to create to fit in and adjust to living in a society where we don't often find a place for ourselves as a means of survival. And later as adults, figuring out which parts of those are really us and which parts we had to create to get to where, or the age that we're at. So I just felt that was a really good quote to kind of start our discussion today.
Absolutely. I think that frames our work together, and especially as we're thinking about our commitment, all of us in this virtual room today. How are we going to take the information that we learned today and make a difference in our community? So we want you to really be thinking about that. What is your intention for today? What will your commitment be following this training? How will you continue to grow and learn so that the next generation has a different, much better reality in their youth? Okay. So we have some goals for our time together. And so we're going to start by reviewing some research around the school experiences and outcomes, as well as the status of mental health for our LGBTQ plus youth. Most of that information is pretty sobering, but we think that it's important for us to all have that foundational understanding of what life is like for these youth, so that it can serve as our why. We need to make sure that we're really thinking about how to better support them across all of the environments and systems in which we all operate. MK is going to take us through a comprehensive overview of and differentiation of gender identity, gender, and sex. I know that we wanted to say in the very beginning, some of us are coming to this session with no education around LGBTQ plus youth. Some of us work in this, day to day, and we want everyone to feel comfortable, learning and growing with us today. So I think that's going to be a really valuable part of our conversation. And again, please do ask questions. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with how we can all support our youth, again, across many different environments within the community. So we wanted to make sure to really set some ground rules, what we're calling our group agreements, to frame our learning this morning. So first, we're asking that you stay present. We were talking before the session started. We know some of you are multitasking right now. Some of you might be caring for children or adults. You might be, doing laundry. Who knows? So stay as present as you can. Again, this will be recorded. Do feel free to use the chat feature. We do have folks monitoring the chat. We do want to share that there will be zero tolerance for any kind of violent or abusive behavior or language. And we want you to please report any such experiences to us, and we will handle it immediately. We also want you to seek first to understand that everyone has different experiences and background knowledge. We want to assume best intentions in all interactions, but we also have to understand that the things that we say or do may have a negative impact on others despite our intent. So we need to be accountable for the impact of our actions and our words. And then finally, we want to remember that we are all here to learn and grow, both individually and collectively. We need to accept non-closure, as we may not arrive at all the answers in our very short time together. So we ask that you'll commit to continued growth by seeking out other opportunities to learn and engage. And we'll share some of those opportunities toward the end. And again, feel free to take notes as we won't be sharing our slides, but we do have that one-page handout with links to resources and organizations. All right, I am seeing that there is already a question in the chat, which is amazing. So we're going to get through the research and then we're going to take a break for questions. And that's when we'll be happy to share that question. So thank you so much for already jumping in. We appreciate it. So we're going to start with an overview of 3 different, oh, sorry about that, MK. I'll keep an eye on it. 3 different research efforts, and the first comes to us from GLSEN. And so GLSEN conducts pretty regular climate surveys regarding, how safe our LGBTQ+ youth feel at school. And I know many of us on this call work in the education sector or have children in the education sector. So I'm really hoping that, we really commit to doing something about these really sobering statistics. So firstly, almost 60% of our LGBTQ+ youth feel unsafe at school, so more than 1 in 2 because of their sexual orientation, 42.5% because of their gender expression, and 37.5% because of their gender. About 1 in 3 LGBTQ+ students miss at least 1 entire day of school per month because they feel unsafe or uncomfortable. And just for our folks that aren't in the education sector, we consider students at risk for not completing school. We consider them at risk for school dropout if they miss 2 days or more a month. So already our students, our LGBTQ youth, are halfway to that at-risk status just because of feeling unsafe. And that, is completely unacceptable in my opinion.
I think too, it's good to point out that safety and belonging are both a prerequisite to the learning environment.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that be as a result of our students who identify as LGBTQ, that's for anything. And we know that when we talk about trauma, we know that when we talk about economic circumstances of our youth at home, if they're not properly fed, all these things have to take place prior to students being able to be in a position to learn and grow.
Really good point, MK. Thank you for that. And I think, some of our later statistics are really going to identify that impact. Our final point on here is, that many students avoided gender segregated spaces in school due to safety concerns. So almost half avoid bathrooms and just under that avoid locker rooms. I mean, I know that that's been quite a hot topic of conversation in our area, and we're going to get a little bit more into that in a bit. And this one really breaks my heart and really, I think, elucidates the importance of having these community organizations coming together to provide supports for our students, because so many of our students are avoiding school functions and extracurricular activities because they felt unsafe or uncomfortable. And while that's how GLSEN words it, I would also argue that they are pushed out of school functions and extracurricular activities because of other people's issues. So it's not really just, it's not really an avoidance so much as it's, not having the opportunity to even participate. So this slide always, just sends chills to my spine. And again, as folks who work in education, I think it really highlights the need to call out, any instances of bias or discrimination when we observe it from students and our colleagues. Slightly more than half of students report hearing homophobic remarks from teachers or other school staff. I'm going to let you sit with that for a second. Go ahead, MK.
Yeah, keep in mind, this is from 2019. I think when we talk about, there's ongoing conversation and dialogue about, hey, we're talking about these things. Families and communities are discussing this, and so we're coming along where things are getting better. It's just important to remember that the data doesn't support that. This data is showing us exactly how things stand, and when we get to our next survey, it's going to be as recent as 2021. Just because we're talking about it doesn't mean that the lived experiences of those individuals are actually getting better. And in a lot of cases, when we're talking about a really big, large change that we're seeking, things often will get worse before it gets better. And so that's what I like to call the other side of advocacy, is as a result of talking about it, that means individuals that weren't paying attention, good or bad, are now paying attention. And that's not always, that doesn't always result in things being good, especially not right away. So I think it's just important to connect the fact that just because it might feel better for some, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people where they're like, but we're talking about it. And I think the change that we're seeking is heading in the right direction, and that will be there soon. And I agree with the potential of heading in the right direction, but the be there soon, for a lot of people right now, especially when we're talking about transgender and gender nonconforming youth, and people, that's not the case. The community is really suffering. And when you start talking about advocating and those efforts, there's a lot of suffering that happens first, before change and lived experiences start to differ for people.
Absolutely. And, thinking about that last bullet point, the fact that this adult behavior legitimizes the use of anti-LGBTQ plus language and actions that subsequently result from that language. Later on when we're talking about how to support our youth, we're going to talk about the importance of modeling, especially, from the parent standpoint. How can I help my student develop healthy coping strategies when they are being bullied? Well, so much of it comes down to our modeling, for good or for worse. And so we need to make sure that we're holding the adults in our school buildings accountable for, modeling the behavior that we expect to see from our students. Especially, a lot of your buildings might have school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports frameworks. And so much of that revolves around changing adult behavior in order to change student behavior. So we are just as accountable as our students, if not more.
This too doesn't always, when we're talking about negative remarks or homophobic remarks or negative comments about gender expression, a lot of times people think that this data is representative of like the most egregious types of things, like really awful things. And while it includes that, sometimes it's as simple as just commenting on, a young child, what they're wearing, and making more of like a soft comment about, oh, that looks like a girl's blah, blah, blah. Any of those things that are just very simple, basic things are felt by students part of the queer community that as a negative kind of, just making them not feel like they're themselves, or making them feel like they don't fit in, or that just that it's a negative, it's kind of a negative comment toward them as a person.
Absolutely. Parker, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was just going to say it. I hope you don't mind. Like,
No.
the word microaggression, sure, there are microaggressions to like misgender somebody, but, one comment, I'm trying to remember exactly how it was worded by somebody, but, talking about how, yeah, you might feel like it, okay, that transgender person that you just misgendered, they just blew up at you, out of nowhere. Like you just misgendered them once, whatever. They might have gotten misgendered 50 times that day. And then that was the time that they just were like, that's enough,
Right.
So those micro aggressions add up, and it feels like very aggressive when those microaggressions keep adding up. So,
Or as simple as, sometimes if a teacher makes a comment about, oh, I'm sorry, Alex, I thought you were a girl, or I've had sometimes in very innocent ways, people say, oh, well, they just, with the short hair or those pants or whatever, they just, how was I supposed to know? Things like that, that all falls into these numbers. Whether it's being said directly to the kids or not, they know it, they feel it, they hear it. and it weighs on them.
And somebody said to me the mosquito analogy, and I don't know the mosquito analogy. Do either of you? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, I know
it's
you're talking- and there's a really good
yeah.
video on YouTube about that. It's explicit, FYI. There is a safe version of it language-wise, but it's hard to find. But yeah, YouTube mosquitoes microaggression, and you'll find it. It's pretty powerful. Yeah. And I think, you know, we don't talk too much about this in our training today, but I want us to think about not just, you know, individual adult student behavior, but we also need to think about the systems that sort of perpetuate those behaviors, because we also need to start there when we're thinking about how to better support our kids, is breaking down those systemic, you know, oppressive structures, and also increasing safety supports at the system level.
Yeah, we have a comment shared that microaggressions equates macro impact. Absolutely. I think that also goes along with the mosquito pieces. One mosquito bite, okay, but 50 mosquito bites for anybody that's ever had one. If each mosquito bite is representative of one microaggression, if you get bit by 50 mosquitoes in a day, you can imagine the impact that would have, especially if you're someone that's extremely allergic.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Absolutely. All right, so now we're going to move into the Trevor Project's national survey. I believe they release, you know, their survey on an annual basis, which is nice. So we have pretty recent outcomes here with their most recent survey. You know, really importantly, this represents, you know, nearly 35,000 youth across the United States, ages 13 to 24. It's the largest survey of LGBTQ plus youth mental health ever conducted. And this wealth of data highlights the resiliency and diversity of LGBTQ plus young people. And it demonstrates how important affirming one's identity is to their health and wellness. I want you to, you know, situate all these statistics within that point. Findings from this cross-sectional survey also point to best practices for how to support LGBTQ plus young people and contribute positively to their mental health. Okay, so here are some of the key findings. First, we see that, you know, 42% of those who responded seriously considered attempting suicide in the past 12 months, with more than half of transgender and non-binary youth having seriously considered suicide. So, you know, just unbelievable, and, you know, points to the urgency around this, you know, epidemic. 94%. Oh, go ahead.
Kate, if you don't mind, I think we have to, as we're going into this, keep this in mind, and I'm going to keep hammering this point, is that it's not as a result of being LGBTQ that LGBTQ people, and especially youth, are inherently seriously considering suicide because they're LGBTQ. It is a direct result of how they're treated by our society, by family, by the environments in which they are living and existing in. So keep that in mind as we're reading all of these statistics.
Really, really important point. Okay, this is not like some kind of inherent predisposition. This is 100% environmental. So, and that's where we as folks looking to better support this population of kiddos should feel empowered, because we know that, you know, we can make a difference in these statistics through our advocacy and our on the ground kind of efforts. We see that 94% reported that recent politics negatively impacted their mental health, which is probably not going to be much of a surprise to most of us. And it also speaks to the importance of modeling healthy consumption of, you know, of media for our kiddos, and making sure that, you know, we have healthy outlets, and that we're having these conversations with our kiddos, that, you know, what they're hearing and what they're seeing doesn't necessarily represent everyone, because, you know, the more that you hear hateful rhetoric and you learn about, you know, these hateful experiences that folks are experiencing, the more you know, feel like that's 100% going to be your reality. And we want our kiddos to have, you know, hope for a better future. And so, you know, our on the ground efforts with that, but also making sure we're having those conversations and thinking about how we can make change in our communities. We see that more than 80% stated that COVID-19 made their living situation more stressful. That actually is, that realization is what sparked MK and I to start doing some of this work at IU 13 right at the beginning of the shutdown last March, knowing that this group of kiddos was going to be significantly more adversely impacted than the rest of their peers. We see that only about a third find their home to be affirming. That 3 out of 4 rated their mental health as poor during this pandemic, and approximately 50% want support from a mental health professional but are unable to receive it. And those of us who work in the mental health sector in Lancaster and Lebanon counties can attest to that dearth of professionals, and the need to recruit more folks to not just the area but to the profession. So that's another advocacy piece for us to recruit more students and retain folks in this field.
And keep in mind too that those youth that wanted counseling from a mental health professional, we're not even talking about informed mental health professionals on the topic. We're just talking getting mental health help, period. So even especially in this area, the ability to find informed providers today is not just enough to be welcoming. That can't be the minimum expectation anymore, that we're just allowing and welcoming queer people into clinical spaces and therapeutic spaces. We have to demand more of ourselves as a community, but also as professionals in that community, that we need to be informed. I know my profession, doctors, nurses, Kate can speak to psychologists. This is elective information when we go to school. This is not required to learn about. This is not information that our programs say you need to know and be informed to adequately work with this population. It's not. It's stuff that we have to seek out extra or pay extra or get continuing education credits on in order to be informed. And so that adds a lot of pressure to us as a mental health system, as a health system. How many times do we talk about LGBTQ people being able to go seek adequate health care in addition to mental health? Is because we don't have informed providers, because they're not required to be informed. And so then that puts weight on the system, but also the individuals that are seeking out that care, because then they're educating the professionals who's supposed to be helping them. And that's very, think about that. If if you were going to see a specialist on something and you had to spend half the time educating them on what they're supposed to already know to be able to help you with, that's flipped in the wrong direction, and that's dangerous. So additionally, they're not only not getting any type of mental health help, but they're most of the time not receiving informed help for the things that directly impact them.
Yeah, it's a really scary kind of combination of variables there. And, folks who have gone through some kind of graduate training program in, the mental health sector, we're driven by principles of professional ethics. And one of those principles is that we don't provide services, we don't operate outside of our competency areas. So as MK said, most of us did not receive specific training for supporting LGBTQ plus clients in our original graduate training, which then leads to those services really not being available. And for some, if they are offering them and they're not well informed, they could be doing a lot more damage than good. So we do have to commit to finding high quality postgraduate, training opportunities, so that we can bring these services, these much needed services, to the community, but making sure that we're, using evidence-based practices to do so.
Well, and think about this too. We're talking about youth. Youth spend most of their time with family and in the school system. And so in addition to our mental health providers and medical providers not being required to be informed, our school entities are also not required to be informed. It is not mandated or part of the general educational requirements to become a teacher or any staff professional in the school system. So when you have social workers like myself, or school psychologists or guidance counselors, the weight is put on those professionals within the school system to be able to help inform everybody else who's not informed, except those professionals are also not required to be informed. So we're working in an entire system where no one's required to be informed. So the few select people that choose to seek outside education and come to trainings like and discussions like this one, or continuing education credits, or just on their own accord choosing to become more informed and immerse themselves in it, the weight then becomes even more on top of them, because our systems and structures aren't saying this is important, aren't saying this is necessary yet. Let me tell you how many staff and professionals are constantly coming and saying, we need help with this, we need help with this, where can we get more information? That leads to part of the reason why Lititz Chooses Love chose for us to have sessions like this, is because there is such a dire need for this. We need it to not just be those of you who are attending today volunteering. We need it to be something that everyone prioritizes, because whether people choose to believe or agree or not, our community exists. We're here, whether people acknowledge that or not. We're here, and we have needs most of the time just as similar as everybody else's.
So real quick, we had you were actually answering this person's question a little bit as it went along, like how do we like what do we have to change to make them have to learn it all so that they are informed mental health professionals, and like, how do we change those general education requirements? And just to throw this out there, because and this would be something, and now I always think of stuff myself that I'm like, oh, I wish I would have researched that. Pushing legislation is always a great thing, right? Like, and in Pennsylvania, and I didn't even know this while I was living in Philly because it is illegal in Philly, but conversion therapy is totally legal here. And that does affect the way that mental health professionals talk to, gender variant people here. So we also get many requests about where people can go for healthcare and mental health around here specifically, because there's so many places that if they go, they may be getting that kind of conversion therapy treatment for their, gender nonconformity. So yeah, but I don't even actually know, like if in other states where they have made it illegal, have we seen a change in the years after that? That's something I would personally have to look into. But if either of you have any knowledge on that whatsoever, or just other suggestions of how we can make those general education things, or those a general education requirement rather than just this outside thing, is there any suggestions that you have?
Well, go ahead, Kate.
You go ahead.
I would say, to Parker's point, yeah. So conversion therapy is something that a lot of people think is not legal in Pennsylvania, but it is. We only have 2 counties out of 64 that have a ban on it. And there are actual licensed professionals providing conversion therapy. It has come under such scrutiny in the past, 5 to 10 years, as it should, because it's extremely detrimental and harmful. Conversion therapy, for those that might not be aware, is the means to try to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity through a therapeutic process. It's actually equatable to honestly to torture, because it's self-rejection. You're teaching someone to reject who they are. So whether based on characteristics that make them the individual that they are. And so that is always harmful and always detrimental, no matter how you spin it. Because it's come under such scrutiny in the past 5 to 10 years, there's been efforts by those who are actually providing it to not use the term conversion therapy. And so there's a lot of other, what I call lingo, that's kind of an indicator to tread and proceed with caution. So anything that uses same-sex attraction, that's not something accepted by the queer community as a term. That's not a term we use. That's not a term we acknowledge. That is very much a term that is used for spaces that are denying our existence and denying who we are as a population, and as a means to try to change or say that this ideology that you have, or this quote unquote lifestyle, is something that needs to be addressed therapeutically because it's a disorder or a mental health concern. So same-sex attraction is one. Reparative therapy, promoting healthy sexuality is another term that's often used. Healing sexual brokenness, sexuality counseling, anything that talks about gender issues or gender identity issues. Generally, an informed provider is not going to call it issues or problems or disorders in that way, because it's not seen as that. There's only 20 states in our entire country that actually ban conversion therapy. Lancaster actually doesn't currently have a ban on conversion therapy. We have an ordinance. Basically, we have a resolution that essentially condemns it, and that was only passed in March of 2021. So just for, we actually have numerous providers here in Lancaster County that actually are providing conversion therapy. We have had a lot of issues with spaces and places that support DEI work, giving platforms to these organizations and agencies providing such types of therapy. So I think that is kind of, problematic in nature for a lot of reasons. But the fact is, there are licensed professionals using their state license and sometimes insurance to provide conversion therapy, and a lot of families are not necessarily even aware. Generally speaking, a lot of times this comes out of religiously based organizations and providers, at least around here. I can't speak to other spaces, but around here, it's extremely problematic. Kate, what did you want to share?
Well, you kind of covered it, but I think it speaks to the importance as parents of really, when we're looking for services and supports for our children, to really vet those providers. And MK has, some fantastic kind of screening questions that you can ask to make sure that the person who is purporting to be experienced with LGBTQ+ youth is really and is using evidence-based approaches to therapy, so that obviously, we can avoid this damaging practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple ways to kind of.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Real quick,
go,
can
no,
Randy
go
ask a
for it.
question?
Absolutely.
Is there any way that we could get a list of the places in Lancaster that are providing conversion therapy? Because I would certainly think that a lot of us would like to avoid patronizing places like that. Even if they don't offer it to us, I don't think I would want to send my children there if that was a thing they do.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting vetting process for sure. I encourage people, as opposed to blasting, this is a bad provider or this is a bad agency. I like people to do their own research because that bad mouthing never really goes well. So what I try to do is give families and people the tools to do their own investigation. So there's two ways that I do that. The first way is I try to give them exactly what I just started with, is terminology and ways in which places have tried to talk about what they provide without using the term conversion therapy anymore. Conversion therapy used to be a very easily identifiable thing because we'd look for those words and boom, we knew who they were. But since the scrutiny and the call out about how damaging conversion therapy is by all our major medical and mental health organizations and lots of advocacy around it, those words have slowly gone away and other words and lingo has kind of started to take its place. So I try to give people the language that's being used as a means to go, that's a problem. That's probably conversion therapy. So you can do your own investigative work. A lot of places aren't including, once we start to call out and take screenshots of like examples, then magically it disappears and it's not available anymore. So that's another reason why I try to have people do their own research. And I very much encourage people to call places and have a discussion before you start paying them for services. And so I give them questions that they can ask as a part of the vetting process to make their own conclusions. So I do have a list that we can provide some of these questions and lingo that we can also put a part of our handout that we can provide people if people are interested, but I can give you some examples here of what that would be. So do you have experience working with LGBTQ youth or the LGBTQ population, and what does it look like? Make them talk about what they've done previously and what their experience is. What type of framework do they use with LGBTQ patients? Does your therapy focus more on a particular problem, or do you use more of a holistic perspective in thinking about the patient as a whole person? I'll tell you why this is important. Some therapeutic modalities are not well suited to support gender or sexual orientation without making it the sole focus of therapy. In turn, it makes patients and clients kind of feel minimized to just that part of who they are. And then that becoming the focus of every issue they have. So not everything that everybody deals with is a result of their gender identity or sexual orientation, such as, discussing anxiety and depression. It's not always rooted in that. So that's why it's important to look at their framework or their approach. How do you describe your experience treating clients who share a specific gender identity or sexual orientation? And I encourage people to put whatever theirs is or their child's is in that slot. So insert sexual orientation or gender identity of your choosing in that language. So how would you describe your experience treating clients who share my sexual orientation or as a bisexual or as whatever? What training and evidence-based treatment do you or your practice have for issues that may arise or challenges that may arise? What's your position on conversion therapy? I just ask them straight out. What is your position on this and how do you see this? What kind of resources and training do you and your practice engage in or have available to remain up to date with the needs of the LGBTQ population? And how would you describe your experience using gender neutral pronouns? Your knowledge of safety risks and considerations related to the LGBTQ population, because we know they're unique. And also, how would you handle in the event that you accidentally or misstepped or made an assumption about myself or came across a stereotype that you insinuated in the session? How would you handle that? How would you handle if a client that kind of called you out on something that was said or you assumed or something like that? What would your approach be? So that you know that it's not damaging, because we know that a lot of times the responses to missteps, as we discussed earlier, is, oh, well, I just thought because you looked this way or this happened that was the case. And that's damaging because it makes it, not only did you screw up what you said, but now you're putting it back on the client in a therapeutic setting that's supposed to be the opposite of that. So yeah, we can include some of that, and that's my approach to it, as opposed to just blasting specific organizations and people, because I also want to give people opportunity to change too.
Luckily, the place I'm going to for therapy as of lately it seems pretty safe.
Yeah.
That's good. And I think it's most important for the individual that's in it to feel safe. Safety is a very personal thing to each of us, and it looks different from person to person. So I like to give people the tools to make their own decisions. I think that's the best approach.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm going to interject real quick too that so Lititz Chooses Love is both working on our website and working on a list of LGBTQ plus affirming places that you can go for healthcare, mental health, any businesses, everything. So feel free to email us with any LGBTQ plus affirming owned. Those are great businesses in the area, because we are definitely building our list of that. And I did want to throw in, while we're still on mental health, it was going back to something a little bit ago, but talking about it's the effect that society has on us that causes some of the problems that we have, right? And that goes a lot and it's not talked about like hardly at all, but the detransition thing. Most transgender people who choose to detransition, it is not because they don't feel great about themselves from themselves. It's because of the way they feel about themselves, how they're treated from everybody else.
That absolutely makes sense. Yes.
Yeah, it's easier to live that lie of like, oh, well, I'll just be the woman that society wants me to be because me being this man is causing all these problems. That's what's causing the problem, is that people are treating me differently now that I'm transgender. So that is actually the typical reason why people choose to detransition at a point. And then that is actually used against us, that like, oh, well, people choose it, it is a phase because people choose to go back to that lie because it's easier than this truth.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and I think that, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I know we have some people that want to talk too.
Yeah. And there's this chat's blowing up. I was just going to say, I'm going to use this word, and I know it's strong, but I also think that point, Parker, that detransition experience has been so weaponized and made out to be like a common experience, especially when we're talking about our youth. And that is not the case. And it absolutely is as a result of, again, those environmental pressures that Parker was talking about. So, it also speaks to, going back to a couple of points ago, making sure that we're getting our information from reliable sources and from experts, and not just, hearing the talking pieces that are really popular, spouting off about their opinions, and weaponizing, an N of one, which means like a very, very small kind of percentage of experiences, and making it seem like that's the majority. Go ahead, MK.
Yeah, so I have a couple people I know. Jamie Beth wanted to jump in here for a second. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thanks so much. This is really fantastic, everyone. I just wanted to speak about mental health and finding providers in Lancaster. I really support what MK says about asking all the questions yourself and doing your research. I have to say that as, I'm a straight cis het woman, but I'm a non-Christian, and finding a therapist in Lancaster was sort of a minefield. And part of the issue is, just because someone doesn't think they hate gay people or hate trans people or whatever you want to put in there, Jews, doesn't mean they actually know how to treat or interact or support them. And so MK, part of me wants to when you say what are your thoughts on conversion therapy? I almost feel like you need to trick a provider, which I don't recommend, but I feel like providers, unscrupulous providers or providers who don't know better, will say the things they think you want to hear. And I really highly encourage people, yes, absolutely ask your own questions, but ask your friends too, because there are things that your friends know about some of these providers that may tip you off to, oh, this person thinks they're warm, welcoming, all-inclusive, everyone's welcome, but they have this very specific bias towards or against this thing that they themselves as a provider don't even realize. So I'll stop there for now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie. I think Jen, is your hand raised?
Okay, did you?
Sorry, no, I was just giving some snaps to Jamie Beth.
I did. Do we have other questions in the chat as well?
Yeah, I'll read off some of them. So one of our lovely participants says, many of our youth that need or want mental health support or help are not able to and or are denied due to the lack of parental or guardian consent. Parents or guardians that do not support their child for who they are will not sign consent for their child. In this case, the child feels stuck, unwanted even more, and becomes more depressed, higher anxiety, self-harm, and even suicide. And then they went on to clarify, when they're underage. And so for the parents on this call, the age of consent for mental health services is 14. So, but we do see, students under the age of 14 really, in need of these mental health supports. And I think those of us that work in schools, the onus is really on us to help educate the guardians of our students, because oftentimes those needs arise in the educational environment, and we can really play a role in helping families know, who they can go to in the community for those, supports that are supportive in nature. Okay.
And one of those things was the biggest statistic that comes out of our research, that is probably, if you take one stat with you from all the ones that we've talked about so far, is that an LGBTQ youth having one supportive adult, no matter where it comes from, whether it's a parent, someone else in the community, a school staff member, doesn't matter where they come from, but if they have one supportive adult, it can cut their risk of suicide by up to 40%. That's huge. That's significant. So in the event, what I try to do with families and encourage staff members to do with families, at school, especially since we know that that's where most of our youth are spending their time. If it's outside the home, it's typically in school, is that in the event that we have families that this is the case for, well, the goal is to help bring them on board and garner their support, because their support is incredibly necessary and has a lasting impact on them for the rest of their life. That's a goal, but that might not be necessarily where we start, because we need to have something and some type of affirmation built into this youth's life somewhere. And that's why the school system becomes so important and so crucial to our youth. And that we can't just have that token staff member for every LGBTQ student in the building that's like the go-to. We need to create, I'm kind of a big advocate of, I am not a fan of safe spaces, but I understand that they're a stepping stone, but they can't be the end goal, is to just create this part of our building where this particular group of staff members are our safe people in our safe spaces. Because first, what does that tell you about every other space in the building? If it's not safe, then it must be unsafe, and that's not okay. But then also that puts a lot of weight and expectation on those individuals. And we don't want Lititz Chooses Loves and organizations like this to need to exist. We want them to exist because we want them, but not because our lives are dependent upon them to exist. We want the systems and the structures and the programs and the events that already exist to exist for everyone, not just certain populations of people. So we're not here to recreate spaces so that they serve certain populations. We want all spaces to serve all populations. That's the end goal. I understand that safe spaces are often a stepping stone to getting there, but they can't be where we rest. So we need to find and start by getting at least one accepting adult in that youth's life somewhere. And so that's usually my first mode of attack, you could say, is to find where in this child's life can we get someone who can affirm them, and then continue to build on that while we simultaneously work with the family to kind of get them on board in whatever way, shape, or form. That can be challenging. That's a whole part, a whole section that we have built into today's topic too, of like, how do we do that? Like, what's the best approach to doing that? And we can dialogue about that more then.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, MK. One other comment, and this comes from a lovely mental health partner in the field and participant. She says, checking a clinician's credentials and professional organization membership to see if they belong to professional organizations that denounce or forbid conversion therapy. So as a parent seeking, these services in your community, definitely look at those credentials and the organizations they belong to. If it's not apparent on the website, ask, because a lot of our professional organizations, all the ones that, that credential my field, absolutely denounce and forbid conversion therapy. So that would be definitely a good place to start. And if certainly there are going to be people that are, not following the rules. So that as a disclaimer, but for the most part, those organizations are, you can trust that. And I think that's it for the chat right now. All right. So we will move into the basics of sex and gender with MK.
Yeah, so to kind of talk, not assuming what people know here and what people don't know here, to kind of keep it as short and simple and as possible, is that there's obviously a difference between sex and gender. And I think the ongoing conversations that are happening in social media via all sorts of different topics, whether it's athletics, whether it's Caitlyn Jenner, whether it's school board meetings. I mean, we're all kind of hearing it. Unless you're hauled up in a hole somewhere, you're probably hearing it from one direction or the other. And I think it's important to know that there are distinct differences when it comes to sex and gender. And that I think right now, gender is when we're talking about gender, we're talking about something that we can't see. There's gender expression, which is how we each express our gender, whether it be through roles, through how we dress, the things that we like, but you can't see someone's gender. Gender is an internal sense of self. And for each of us, that is different. It is not a boxed this or that category. And I'll be honest, neither is sex. And this is the part that generally challenges a lot of people, because it's like, science is clear, you're male or female. And yeah, for a long time, that is what science has said, and that is what the general consensus was, and what everybody was taught, and that's the conditioning most of us have grown up under. However, there's been a lot more, I don't know if permission's the right word, but maybe, with science to start studying things that were not exactly permissible to study before. And it actually, a lot of it in the recent decade has come from studying intersex people. And to give you an idea, because a lot of people talk about how, well, intersex is just a very, very, very small population of people. And while, okay, to some degree, that's not completely incorrect, intersex people represent 2% of the population. And for comparison, people with red hair represent 1%. So generally, it's a lot more than people think it is. And it's important to understand why studying intersex individuals is part of this conversation. Well, because we were trying to figure out how to treat so that intersex didn't happen, and what was the problem and where did that come from. And when science was given permission to kind of do that, it kind of pulled open this curtain to, whoa, sex isn't exactly what we always thought it was. And while we don't have all the answers to all these different phenomenon that happen, as we started studying all the variants that can happen with intersex individuals and kind of trying to figure out how it happens, it just unloaded all these variables. And so when they looked at that, they're like, wow, sex is a lot more complex than we thought it was. It's not just this simple. So it's not just when we look at an anatomy scan of someone who's expecting a baby and going, oh, we see this or we see that, and that, boom, is sex. No, it is so much more than that. We're talking about not just reproductive organs externally and internally, but we're talking about chromosomes, we're talking about genes, we're talking about hormones, we're talking about secondary sex characteristics. And this is important because the determination of what we're calling biological sex is just so complex. It doesn't just involve those pieces that I talked about, but it's the choreography of all of those pieces and how they start to unfold over time, over the course of someone's life. So it's not just cemented into someone from the moment they're in the womb and exposed to either this or that. It's really not that simple. And chromosomes don't necessarily make up what someone's secondary sex characteristics turn out to be. So hormones are also not gendered. So we're breaking down all these pieces I just said make up sex. So hormones aren't gendered. All humans have levels of estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. All of us do. And all of it varies from person to person. And within each person, it varies hour to hour. So if you go get your hormone levels drawn right now, and in half an hour to an hour, go get them drawn again, they're going to be different. And when we look at what's considered average or normal levels, there's a lot of variance there. And that variance plays a part in that choreography I just talked about with how things unfold as people age. So it's just not that simple. So based on kind of what I just shared, to kind of make it understandable as best possible, is that what science, everybody says, science is clear, science is clear, science is clear. Well, the only thing science is really clear about is the fact that the way we've always thought about it, we probably shouldn't anymore, because it's just so much more complex than that with sex and gender. There is a lot of sexual and genetic diversity. And as a result of knowing that, we need to adopt a different mindset from what we've always had. And because we need to adopt that different mindset, we're still learning. Science is no longer shunned from studying this, but it's going to take time to study it. And we need to give that time. In the meantime, what we shouldn't do is harm people. And so this old ideology, this old mindset of what we always thought was this or that, black and white, that's not the case anymore. And if we keep operating under that premise and under that ideology, we are actively harming people, and we need to stop doing that. So given that, let's talk. What do people think? Because we're going into a heavy topic coming up here. So I'd like to hear from from our participants. What are your thoughts on that? Is this new information? Is this, what don't we understand? What questions do we have?
Well, the participants prepare their questions and everything. I'm going to throw in, again, just a reminder that we are recording this today. So if anybody wants the recording, please do just email us at littitschooseslove@gmail.com. I think we'll also make it available on YouTube. And I think I had something else, but I forgot. Go ahead.
Does anybody have thoughts on that or questions?
Based on the chat, I think folks are digesting that information, MK, that we are all, so thankful for you to share with us this morning. It's pretty quiet right now.
I saw a
And-
hand go up. Yeah.
One of the things that I would say as I'm reflecting on this, and I like the way that you broke out chromosomes aren't gendered, et cetera, and they can change and that they're fluid over time. And that really also helps me to reframe in a different way how each of us are always in constant fluidity as well. And that this is not something that's either set as a child or that you know when you're in your 20s. It's something that is a constant self-assessment and practice, I guess.
Yeah, well, and as humans, we're designed to feel, we want to feel concrete in things that makes us feel better, right? So this idea that we need to be flexible, especially after we've been taught not to be on these in this arena, it gives us anxiety. Let's be honest. It gives us, it's challenging what we've always known. It's challenging what we've always accepted. And I'm going to be completely transparent here, and I'd be hard pressed if many would disagree. But our social hierarchy that we've had and established as a people and as a community and as a population played a part in this. Why was science shunned from studying all of this for years? Well, let's think about that. Think about our history. Our history is based upon this premise that those assigned male at birth were of a higher stature and social status than those assigned female at birth. And that still plays out today, despite people's disagreement with that or thought that things are a lot better. That could be debated in 100 different contexts, but we still have issues with that today. And so that played a part in our ability to actively study these things, because what happens if we study and we find out, well, that's not exactly how we've based our society and what we've built our society on isn't actually that way. That would create a lot of problems. Everything would break down from there. Jamie Beth has her hand raised.
Well, MK, just listening to you, and I mean, I've come up to this conversation and to knowing all of you through transgender inclusion in sports, specifically in the Hempfield School District. And I feel like listening to you talk and listening to your sort of comfort level with ambiguity and your comfort level with here is new things we're learning. It sort of, I feel like it's the whole earth is flat, earth is round thing happening all over again, right? Like we are talking to people who have been told the earth is flat. So when you say, you know what, it's probably round and this is why we know it's round and this is why it's important that it's round. And they're just saying it's flat, it's flat, it's flat, it's always been flat, it's flat. And so I just want to, I mean, I don't necessarily have a question except to say, how do we talk to the people who still think the earth is flat with regard to sexuality, gender, all of it? Because that's really, I'm actually starting to have some sympathy for people who are like, they just can't process this new information to them, but for everyone's health and well-being, we need them to.
Well, and if we look at how kind of COVID's gone, there's a piece in that too. Like everybody wants the answers now. And so if we don't have the answers, but we can say what we've always thought was not right, but we're working on this, like people are impatient. And so there's that piece too. People are impatient with science when they go, well, we learned a little bit more. And so that changes the decision that we made 3 months ago, or all of that plays a fact in this. A comment that came through is that science has to be funded, and what gets funded comes from societal values. Like touche, absolutely. Someone else asked, how do we educate a closed-minded school board about science behind sex and gender? Being exhausted of everyone thinking that biological sex is clearly defined. Well, being educated is a two-way street, right? So like the information can be there, but you also have to want to learn it and you have to be open-minded to take it. And some individuals, that's just not the case. And so that's a difficult question to answer. But the nice part is that we're having discussions like this and the information is accessible and it is there. And the more people talking about it and the more people going, maybe what I always thought isn't the case. And just starting there can open the doors to, so what can I say and do in the way in which I engage and talk and touch the world to continue to reiterate this fact that while we don't know how all of these phenomena are maybe related or not related, or what play that they have, we know what we always thought wasn't true. And so we might have to sit in that for a while, but in the meantime, we really need to stop doing damage to people. And let's talk about these statistics that are causing harm, and the fact that us not being inclusive of trans youth or trans people or gender variant people is killing them, and is doing such damage. Like, it's not worth that. What and how can we do better? Because once we know we can, we should. That's an obligation. Parker.
Oh, and actually, just to throw on a completely different viewpoint and potential way of talking to people, because, you know, I think that there's always good to have multiple ways of solving a problem, right? I personalize myself a lot as a trans man for people, because, you know, like, I'm a volunteer, I'm a doting uncle, like, I live with my parents to help take care of them in their older age. Like, you could, like, what more do you want? Like, you know, so I personalize myself a lot, though, and just like, look, I'm a real person. I have a family who loves me and needs me, and I'm just a person. Like, and I just happen to have a vagina too.
Yeah, like, the denial of existence doesn't change people's existence. You know, whether you're talking, supporting, or advocating for our community doesn't change the fact that we're here. We're not Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or any of those made up characters. So.
Okay, we have 2 comments in the chat. One is, it's a very specific question. This participant says, what are the differences between transgender and non-binary? I work with a kiddo who identifies as transgender and non-binary, and I was unsure.
So transgender is generally, we try not to generalize, so then I obviously try to avoid that word as well. However, in this context, I feel it works. Transgender is an umbrella term used to describe people that do not identify as they were assigned at birth. So we do, you know, typically how individuals are assigned at birth is based on anatomy scans, looking at one of those variables that I said play into sex and making a concrete determination. So if someone grows up to go, wait a minute, that's not, I don't feel like that's who I am. Transgender is usually a term that's used to describe that. Now, not everybody who does not identify as they were assigned at birth chooses to use that term. And non-binary is sometimes the population that may say, I'm non-binary, but I don't identify as transgender. And I identify as non-binary, but also as transgender, but that's not the case for everyone. And generally non-binary, I always say I avoid the term non-binary, not because I don't like it, but because I don't feel like it helps people get closer to understanding who I am, because the purpose of it is actually in not boxing. It's as broad as you can get. It just basically means not male or not female. And so that can mean a lot of different things. That could mean fluid from one day to the next, or time to the next, moving across that spectrum from female to male and everything in between. It could mean neither. It could mean something completely different than male or female. So non-binary just kind of pops that box into like a cloud where it's just like changing constantly, that it doesn't have a set parameter of ways to identify as non-binary. Go for it, Parker.
Yeah, I'm a fan of defining terms to you know what I mean? Like, because there are some people who, a lot of the community still uses transgender as the umbrella term, but kind of what MK was saying right there brings to light the fact that, like, non-binary really should be the umbrella term, but everybody has their own words that they prefer. You know, even within the transgender community, I've heard a lot of the younger people, and I actually agree with this myself, but I have no older people who totally identify FTM. They're like, no, I've identified as FTM since, you know, for the last 20 years, that's my identification. But there's a lot of a new like movement within the community itself to steer away from male to female and female to male terminology, because those are biological sex terms. And what we as a community are constantly trying to do is separate gender from biological sex. So why are we using biological sex terms to describe our gender?
Right.
And I kind of agree with that. But again, I'm not trying to take anybody's identity away. That's, you know, that each person has their own reason for choosing to identify the way they do. Because I've even heard gatekeeping about certain trans men being like, no, you can't identify as a lesbian anymore because now you're a man. And like,
Yeah.
I come from an age where like, no, like being, I identified as a lesbian too, because, you know, that's what you did when you were like a butch youth back in the 90s. So that is an identity that if I belong to a lot of lesbian groups for those 6 years that I identified that way, that's something to my identity that I might want to keep. And that is not for somebody else to take away from me.
At the end of the day, and kind of highlighting what, to summarize what Parker and I both said, people are who they say they are. And we're talking about linguistics. So in order for people to understand other people, generally we have to use words. And so we have to either make terms or use terms that are understood or able to be understood by people. But there are a lot of us, and I'd say me included, that I'm picking the words that get as close as possible as I can to describing who I am, but not 100%, because those words don't exactly exist. It took me 30 years to find the words that I use now. So it's a means of communication more so than it is a box to put people in. So to answer your question, the difference lies in whatever the person in front of you is telling is the difference. Believe who they are when they say this is who I am, the words that they're describing, the context in which they're describing who they are, and do everything you can to honor that in every way that they're asking you to. It's not a means for comparison, if that makes sense. I believe
Eric?
Nicole has a question.
Oh, Nicole and then Eric.
Yeah.
I love Eric. So my question is, we have a 5-year-old daughter that we co-parent who is very, very stuck in gender roles. And we are trying so hard, you know, we only have her on the weekends. Okay. And so we're trying really hard to teach her, like to unteach her certain things and teach her other things. And I just want to know, like, how do you teach gender and sex to a 5-year-old? How do you have, like, what are the words you use? What are resources? Are there books out there? We're a big book family, but like, how do we do this so that we're teaching the right things? I mean, our other kids live here, and so they were just kind of taught differently. And so this is an issue that we haven't come across before.
Well, if you look at child development, that younger population really wants to be set in things. Like they're a lot less flexible because they want things to be kind of concrete, because that's how they feel a sense of security, right? And so that's not necessarily to say that this topic or other topics, I don't know how your 5-year-old is, but I know a lot of younger kids, they like need that structure to get through their entire day of like, I know what to expect. I know when to expect it. So sometimes when it comes to sex and gender, that can be the case too. I'm going to throw a pitch to Aaron's bookstore here. They have lots and lots of books. I know Lititz Chooses Love has their book library as well, where there's a lot of comprehensive material on this kind of stuff that is age appropriate. That would be helpful in this way of just kind of gently challenging, well, what did you think about this? Or this is okay. We have a lot of times where we rehearse specific statements for these kinds of things as a way to help the younger population adjust to be a little bit more flexible in their thinking about it, because our society conditions all of us this way. Like every gender and sex is built into like everything from what we buy off the shelves to what services we seek to how we seek them to who does what in the household. It's just over and over and over again. So when younger children say, you look like a boy, or why does he dress like a girl? We'd say simple things like, there are a lot of different ways people can dress, and all of these things are okay here. Or why do you play with girl toys? That's weird. Here, all children can play and do things together. It's never okay to make fun of people for things. We want to make sure everyone feels welcome and happy to be here. And doing that in your household or in your school program or in your agency, just continuing to reiterate that people can look and act and sound and engage in all different ways, and it's always acceptable. When you tie all of that into the values of kindness and respect, just like you would teach anything else, you continue to give permission, but also build confidence that all of those things are okay. And you'll be surprised. They'll start saying those things to their friends or at school or with grandma and grandpa or whomever else. It's really fun to watch. So I'd start there.
And real quick, Lititz Chooses Love's library has been building, and we do have a good selection of LGBTQ plus kids books, like 5-year-old perfect. And just to expand on MK's point, one of the things that I always use as an example of how ingrained gender is from birth is, I used to cashier at South Street Whole Foods years and years ago when I was at my more genderqueer phase. I was incredibly androgynous, like literally got stopped on the street by people to ask me, are you a boy or a girl? And what would happen with the little kids in the cart with the parents is, when the kids are at the age of like pointing and saying what things are, right? Learning what things are. They'd get to me and they'd go, Mommy, what's that? Because they're not used to saying person. They're used to saying boy, girl. They don't know what you are as a person if you're not a boy or a girl with that kind of training, So yeah, it is such an ingrained thing.
Well, it is. And like at 5, boys are yucky, right? Like that's what she thinks. And so I've just realized how ingrained it is in everything she's learned so far, and trying to undo that. And we're painting Teddy's toenails on the weekends and, really trying to like switch up things here. But I appreciate, MK, that you touched on 5-year-olds and they're needing to have like that, having that rigidness, right? That at least makes me feel like we're on the right path, because we're doing those things and it's not necessarily changing behavior, but that could be age related as well. So I appreciate you touching on that point, because I didn't think of that before. So I appreciate all of you.
Stay the course. Eric.
Thanks. No, it's not a question, it's a comment, if that's all right. But I actually do want to say something to Nicole as well, which is as a former, maybe future teacher, I always found that home values really trump the outside values. Now you're dealing with this kind of nuanced sort of third angle where there's multiple homes in the school, but I think there's something really powerful that kids as young as 4 or 5 can really start to internalize, which is, this is what I believe. This is what your parents believe. This is what some other people believe. Here's what others believe. I mean, any hefty issue. I found that I often use this language around conversations around what happens after death, as another big example. I can share what I believe happens, and I can share what other people believe happens. And then the empowering statement is, you as an individual will figure it out as you grow up. I think there's something really freeing about that statement, that your child can hear, like, oh, there's a reason why I'm hearing these different ideas around this topic. And I think there's something really powerful for them to know that there will be growing autonomy for them to decide, what they believe as well. There's also a risk there, right? There's this risk of like, well, maybe they really will, take on this other ideology or this other set of information. But usually I think it's the adults in a kid's life that are making it so concrete. I think kids usually can kind of see through that eventually. They can kind of see like, well, wow, this person's saying this is how it is and it must be this way. And everyone thinks this, the earth is flat, the earth is flat. And then this other adult in my life is saying like, look at the spectrum of possibility. And I think there's something very empowering about that for kids. But what I really raised my hand for, MK, was as we were talking about language around identity. I identify as queer, and one of the reasons why I identify as queer is to disrupt rather than disclose. To be asked that question, particularly by a stranger, is, is inappropriate in a way. They're asking for information that cishet folks rarely, if ever, need to divulge in a 5-minute, or less statement. And I think that can be powerful for some kids to know that, like, Queer can hold it all. You don't have to have it all figured out yet. And you don't have to share those details with people that you don't want to. You can do that on your own time, and it can be a process, not a moment. So in school settings, more with later adolescence and high school, early college age youth, I found that queer was, there was something really empowering about that too, for them to know like, there's a fluidity there anyway. And so I don't necessarily expect, where I am right now to be where I am, 10, 20, 30 years from now. And neither should you as a 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old. You have the ability to give yourself that space and to put up a boundary to say like, I don't need to share this with you right now. I can disrupt it. I don't want you to take the words that I use to identify myself with assumptions. I want you to have to get to know me, as Parker and MK were saying. I want you to hear how I use those words, not necessarily how you assume I use them.
Oh yeah, Eric, I definitely love that. I think for those that, give a little history and context, queer was a word that was generally taken back by the LGBTQ community. It was a term that was often used.
Yeah, that's okay. They can't see you.
Used as a term to kind of be derogatory in nature. And so it was one actually for many years I did not, I kind of refused to use because of that history. And it shows you the changes over the course of time too, and the differences between older LGBTQ individuals and our upcoming and younger population, and how those things have changed. But also a lot of times youth are using terms as a means to inform themselves, but also as a way to like navigate through it. So youth that are coming to you saying at school, well, this is how I identify, this is how I identify. Some of this is them just trying it out. They're trying it on for size and trying to figure out, does this feel right? Does this feel good? Does this make sense to me? In addition to also communicating it to somebody else. But yeah, Eric, I couldn't agree with you more. It's about learning from that individual, and what and who they're sharing the information with is an invitation and a privilege and an honor, regardless of the linguistics or terms that are used. Queer can hold it all. I think it's also important to recognize queer. Some of the social norms around it is that it's used by people in the community, but not generally used or supposed to be used as a means to say, if you were someone outside of the queer community, calling someone else queer would still be kind of seen as not favorable, offensive, or kind of derogatory in nature. That's a term that was taken back by the community and that we use as a means to identify ourselves. So thank you, Eric. I appreciate that.
So MK, in the
Yes.
same vein of, opening the eyes of some of our colleagues, neighbors, family members, friends, etc., we have two questions that I think get at the same kind of overall main idea. The first is around, or the first comment I would say is, or situation is around a GSA student group wanting to create their own tutorial for school staff around inclusivity issues that arise in the classrooms, et cetera. And then the other one, again, same kind of vein, is working with colleagues that, are majority female, middle class, straight, Christian, and may not, understand other, groups of people, traditions, identities, et cetera. And how do we educate those folks?
Yeah, so very loaded questions, but I'm here for it and appreciate it. And I don't, for everyone, I don't pretend to have all the answers at all. I'm just one mind at this work that requires all of us. And so this is just one vantage point, one place of thought, but I encourage you to get many, many others as we continue dialoguing about this in our communities and families. But I always think that input and the driver's seat should be with students, always. I don't care what their age is. I don't care where they're at, what they have in their backpack. None of that should matter. That's their space, and we're there to guide and help and support, but not to direct. So I think GSA's creating a tool like that for staff I'm all for it. Because if you're not listening to students in a school setting, what are you doing? Honestly, But then also, especially when you're talking about something that, like we discussed earlier, isn't something that the professionals and the adults are coming to the table knowing about. Generally, that's not what's happening here. We come in knowing math and social studies and English and phys ed and those pieces, but we're not coming in understanding who our students are when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're missing the boat on that. And the problem is we're doing all of this backwards. We're coming in with the learning, and we're trying to figure out all the other pieces of our students' needs after the fact, when we just talked about this idea that safety and belonging is a prerequisite to the learning. So if we're starting with the material, we're missing the boat if we don't understand the needs and who is sitting in front of us. We have to be there first. It's part of the reason why, if you go into any elementary school, they spend what, a month in the beginning of the year, and probably again after the holiday break, talking about expectations and what to expect in our classrooms and what's okay and what's not okay and all of that. Well, we need to be building in these other pieces as well, so that we can create an environment for everybody that's in front of us, but also anybody who we think may not be in front of us. Because to be inclusive, we can't just think about who we think is sitting in those seats.
Yeah.
We have to think about everybody as best possible, and create environments that are accessible and inclusive, and representative of all people. And so if we're not listening to the students that we're teaching or that we have the privilege of working with, I'm not sure what we're trying to accomplish. So I think that is incredible and awesome, and I would be behind that 5,000%. When it comes to working with other staff, or just generally other people that have a different mindset or different ideology, or maybe haven't been exposed to, I try as best I can every day to wake up with this idea that ignorance isn't always chosen, that sometimes it happens as a result of not being exposed to things, and sometimes we don't know what we don't know, but staying there, that is a choice. And so you have to evaluate who's in front of you as well. Is this person making a choice to remain in this place and doesn't have the desire to learn about the students, doesn't have a desire to learn or be open-minded, or be willing to challenge and be uncomfortable for a minute to have things challenge what they might have always known? Change is uncomfortable. It's built into our DNA. It is just generally uncomfortable for all of us. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't experience it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be uncomfortable from time to time to challenge what we've always known. But if people are continuously making the choice to stay there, then you might need to take a different approach, or have a different workaround with different people. I try really hard as a means of self-care not to invest too much of my time and energy in people that are only looking to argue or harm or remain in the space that is comfortable for them. I try to plant seeds, drop things for them to think about, and then as a means to keep my energy and my commitment to this work going, I walk away at minimum for a period of time. Because again, I can't choose for them to stay or to grow. That's up to them. So I think making opportunities and places and spaces to access accurate, factual information that is helpful to people's growth is where energy should continue to exist, so that if or when those individuals make the choice, they know where to go and they can find it and they can circle back around. So that's generally my approach. That doesn't mean that's the right approach or that needs to be your approach. That's just one way. If others have other ideas, I welcome that here.
I was going to say, I've actually found through some of the work that we've been doing that the school board for PA, like their website and everything, it has great definitions of like equity and inclusion. And, do you find that it's very helpful to point out to coworkers that like, oh, it's actually your duty to care about all the kids and treat them with equity and everything?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Parker. It's disheartening when individuals feel that there's some type of threat coming from this idea of being inclusive. That always breaks my heart when I hear language around that, or don't expose my kid to that. Well, it doesn't change the fact that these populations of people exist and these needs exist, and I'm not entirely sure what is so frightening to you about being inclusive of everyone. why is that so frightening, and trying to get to the bottom of what that is. And a lot of times it's fear of the unknown. It's even my parents that are rejecting of their, or not affirming of their LGBTQ youth. It always, oh, I have yet to meet the family or the adult that it doesn't stem from this place of, I'm fearful my child will not grow up to be happy, healthy, and successful. It is always rooted in that, whether it's religiously based or coming from some other, it's, I don't want my child to suffer. And I fear if they live this lifestyle or they choose to be this person, that's the case. Well, then they need to be given language and education. But first, for my mental health professionals and professional staff out there working with families, you got to give families a space to talk about everything they're afraid of, no matter how ugly or bad or ignorant it might sound. They need that space too, to talk about everything that scares the crap out of them, because they care about their kids, and we don't want to turn them away because of that. We want to help them understand how their rejection or their rejecting behaviors, their, oh, don't tell anyone because they'll treat you differently, so I don't want you to talk about it. The intent is to protect their child, but what they don't understand is that message, don't tell anybody, I want you to keep it a secret because I'm scared of what other people will do to you, I'm okay with you, but don't tell anybody else, that them doing that is rejecting them, is saying that this piece about you that you have no control over is so detrimental and harmful that I don't want you to tell anybody about it. And that is influencing all those statistics that we just shared with you about how LGBTQ youth feel about themselves and what they think about themselves, and this isolation that they experience, and the suicidal ideation that can stem from that. If we are able to help families connect their inability to affirm their child, or at least their unwillingness to decrease their rejecting behaviors, if we can make that point and help them, we know that the family impact has typically the biggest impact on LGBTQ youth lives. I always kind of describe it in the way of grades. So my teachers and school staff out there, a 50% is still an F, but it's a lot better than a 0, right? So when we're talking about rejecting behaviors, we're saying, if we give a basic comparison of a transgender youth who's male, trans male, right? So going from being my daughter to being my son, okay, well, family that's rejecting is continuing to use my daughter, my daughter, my daughter. That's the 0%, right? And the goal is to get to 100%, the acknowledgement of this is now my son. But families take time often to get there, and that's not something that usually happens in an instant, right? So if we can get out of the rejecting behavior territory and get to, might not be affirming yet, but we're going to decrease the rejection and the harm that's done, and get to my child, we're making a lot of difference on that ability to prevent harm from being done. Because while they're not in what I like to call affirmation station yet, they're hovering in an arena where they're giving themselves time, but they're not harming their child. And perpetuating that exact thing they're fearful of happening, and that they're going to be unhappy, unhealthy, and unsuccessful. Because if they keep up those rejecting behaviors of, I'm going to keep you away from LGBTQ propaganda, I'm going to keep you away from other LGBTQ youth, you're not going to that GSA, and we promote that isolation, and I'm going to keep you away from it, it's going to have no effect on changing who they are, because we know that that's not possible, that's not a thing. But they're contributing to the very thing that they're afraid those things they're keeping them from is going to give them. Like, they're actually creating the harm that they're afraid of. And if you're able to successfully get families to see that and reduce and go from, I won't call you who you were assigned at birth, but I'll call you my child. You're not my daughter anymore, now you're my child. We're already significantly having an impact on those really scary statistics that we went over here in the very beginning.
Yeah, I describe it as this, there is a parental love that is like, and this happens to other, just gay people and stuff like that too, but that parental love that's like, I don't want you to be treated different, I don't want you to be bullied upon, so I'm going to encourage you to be normal so that we don't have those problems, so that you don't have those problems in school. If you just be a normal kid, then you won't have those problems. So yeah, it can come from a good place, but it is incredibly detrimental, because yeah, you're not feeling acceptance anywhere now. because yeah, you go to school and you get bullied at school for being different. And then when you go home, instead of your parents saying it's okay to be different, they're saying, well, yeah, maybe stop being so different.
Yeah, I encourage everyone on this topic to research the Family Acceptance Project because they have a ton of information on this, and the research that was done that talks about how keeping your queer child from rejecting behaviors like keeping your queer child away from LGBTQ friends, resources, GSAs, and spaces had the equivalent impact of physically abusing your child. That was actually found in the research that they did way back in 2009. So we have known this for a long time. And so the impact that family rejection has on queer youth is so heavy. It is important that we at minimum try to reduce rejecting behaviors if we can't get to affirming. Affirming, I say, is always the end goal, is always the space that we're always trying to push the needle to and get to. But at minimum, we need to get out of the rejecting area because we know the detrimental impact that it has on our youth. So enough of me talking. We have a few hands. Jamie Beth, I believe yours was first.
I just wanted to reiterate and reemphasize something you said about, especially for teachers and school professionals, that if you're only talking to the people you think are in the room, there are mistakes being made. One, because you might not know who's in the room. So a student who is questioning their sexuality, questioning their gender on a path that you're not aware of, you could be saying things that are detrimental to that person. And even if everyone in your classroom is cis, het, whatever, if you only speak in gender binaries and if you promote strict gender roles, you are harming the people that they will then come into contact with throughout their life. So it's not just important to be speaking in an inclusive way when you think you have a marginalized student in your classroom. It's important to be doing that all the time because that inclusion will ripple out into the community.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie.
I think
Nicole?
we have Nicole and then Joel.
I just have been running into some issues in my school district with getting them. They seem to be more open to being inclusive, like at the middle school and high school levels, but like at elementary school, they just don't seem to think it's needed. And so I'm just wondering, what are ways to push harder at the elementary school level? Like they just kind of like don't want to hear it, which is not surprising, I guess, but it's like I just need like a whole different message. I don't know, because the message everything that I've done has been somewhat effective at that higher level, but it's like at the elementary school level, they're not really changing anything. And I guess I don't know how to push at that level, or what language to use, or what language I'm not using. I don't know, but that's my main question, is how do we advocate at the elementary level, and how does that look different than advocating at the middle school and high school level?
Can I throw something in real quick first, please? Even though I'm the one who doesn't work in the schools. I actually think that this is a really important point of separating out gender identity and sexual orientation, because still so many people are conflating the two. And that's one of the reasons I think there's a huge resistance to like teaching in elementary school, like, no, that's all about sex and we don't talk to kids about sex. And like, okay, I appreciate waiting until middle school for sexual education stuff, or high school or whatever they're doing these days. But like, it's not about sex. Gender identity is not about sex. It's not about having sex. It's not about sexual orientation. Gender is not about having sex. It's just not.
No.
So I think that's an important point to like really separate those two out for like, no, we need to teach kids in elementary school about gender identity. It's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to try to jump in on this without going too much on a soapbox, but I think, firstly, Nicole, advocating for high quality professional development for staff, is going to be fundamental to this effort. And, we certainly can point you to some, organizations and folks that can provide that for your school district. The other thing I would recommend, especially given the elementary, it being situated in the elementary level, a lot of schools have multiple kind of leadership decision-making entities within the building to look at things like academics and curriculum, to look at things like behavior and school climate. Best practice is to have family representation on those decision-making committees. So I would ask, are there parent representatives on these committees? If so, is it representative of all the students in our district? Because public schools we're tasked with providing a fair, appropriate public education for all students. So our school expectations, our curricula need to be informed by the voices and the backgrounds of our entire constituency. And I say that because, we know that that's not always the case. So we need to be pulling our parents in to that shared decision-making. We need bi-directional communication with our families. We need their input. We need them to be partners with us in this journey. And so, most of the schools that I support are really welcoming that, but I know that it's not always apparent to our parent stakeholders. They don't always know how to become involved. And so I'm going to ask that my educational folks on the call, make that more apparent to families, do more outreach with families, get those family members represented on those decision-making boards, because, it's their babies that we're educating, and their voices are important.
Absolutely. I think too, the American Academy of Pediatrics says that by 4 years old, most children have a sense of their gender identity. And so it goes back to kind of what Jamie Beth was saying about how that's not always something that can be seen in a classroom. And so when we're talking about teaching our younger children, we spend so much time on values of kindness, respect, and how we treat other people. And so it can be as simple as that. Well, we already are teaching these things, and we're not necessarily teaching the specifics of each identity that somebody may or may not have, regardless of whether it's queer related or religiously related or anything else. It's about, we treat all people with kindness and respect, and it doesn't matter where differences may lie, that shouldn't change regardless. And so that is embedded in what we're already teaching at an elementary school level. And so we're not really changing what we're doing, we're just making it more comprehensive is really the strategy. And if you have educators arguing with you about that, that's concerning in and of itself, because it's not differing really from anything that we're doing. We're just making it better. Joel.
Hi, and thank you very much for doing this today. Appreciate all your wisdom that's being shared. And Kate really kind of hit on this a little bit there as part of her response to the previous person who was speaking, asking a question. But I am a parent in the Central York School District, which many of you may have heard and got to experience through different news reporting and stuff, that we've been pretty famous, at least on the west side of the Susquehanna, not only for banning books and other things, but also fighting when it comes to LGBTQI plus support groups and things like that, activities, just the population, the people in general. I put this in the chat with MK, I think, and one of the things that we've been hearing a lot at school board meetings is, that these are recruitment tools, that we are actively recruiting our children to be part of the LGBTQI plus community. I guess part of, maybe not so much of a question, just because we're kind of living in it in our district right now, is the importance of showing up at school board meetings, the importance at not letting these people who are often there every single time talking about, how horrible and awful, the schools are for not teaching quote unquote American values, and just to be present in those ways as much as possible. Oftentimes, they're the only voices that actually speak at these meetings. And so just to be actively advocating, not just with politicians in a sense at Harrisburg or DC, but also at the very, very local level at the school board meetings. We had a wonderful experience about a month or two ago where we had, I think, about a dozen or more kids from the LGBTQIA plus community that bore their souls, spoke out, talked about how hurtful and damaging much of what the school board has done is, and the comments coming from people in the community that they just sit and allow to be said without any sort of pushing back in any sort of way. So that's my little soapbox. Because of the disaster that's been going on in our school district with our school board, and just a horrible situation it's put a lot of people in, just to be very active at that. So thank you very much.
Thank
I'll
you.
just speak
We
to
really
that real
appreciate
quick. It's another reason I try and make myself very visible as a trans man, because seeing happy adult transgender people really fights that narrative of indoctrination and all this stuff. Because at the Hempfield meetings, there was one mother who I remember in particular, just because of her wording was just exactly like that. She said, "We don't hate these transgender kids. We just want you liberals to stop lying to them about who they are." And, so that they have that idea that we're just lying to kids and telling them that they're different people than who they are and stuff. And so I feel that a good way to fight that kind of rhetoric is like, okay, cool. So you think I'd make a better woman? Looking at me now as a 30-year-old person. Again, that works for you.
There is no damage that can be done. And I know this sometimes comes up, especially with practitioners or people working with youth and different things that come up, whether it be trauma or mental health or other stuff. And there is no harm that can be done in believing people when they tell you who they are. There's no harm that can be done, because even if later maybe they have more clarification or it's not quite what they thought, there's still no harm being done in believing people when they tell you who they are. So whether that's youth working through trauma, or whether that's people coming out later in life, or it doesn't make sense to me, or you don't look that, all of those things again are damaging gender assumptions and stereotypes and all that. There is no one way to look, going back to teaching younger people and young children about values of respect and kindness. And there's nothing that avoiding stereotypes and assumptions about people and just generally believing people when they say, this is who I am. There is no harm that can be done in that at any age, in any way.
Absolutely. MK, I think Rod wanted to share something.
Yes, Rod.
Yeah, I just I have lived my whole life in Lancaster County, and I teach in a fairly conservative district on the eastern side of the river. And as a teacher, I find myself, at least in that situation, kind of evaluating my words and actions, and often overthinking the things on a daily basis. And so I'm kind of interested in like ways to be inclusive, promote inclusion. I don't know if subtly is the right word, but like not so overtly, but promoting that inclusive, welcoming environment without ruffling feathers.
Well, go for it, Kate. You take this one.
I think, again, it starts with your building's culture, right? And you should have family representation in those decision-making committees. And I think that you doing the work as the adults in the building and making sure that, again, your expectations in your building are reflective of all of your stakeholders is key. And I don't know how anyone could argue that against that. I just don't. And I know that folks are, and it baffles me. And that's why I'm stumbling over my words now, because it shouldn't be an issue, and it is. But I think, doing that work with your colleagues, pulling your parents into, partner, making sure that our media that we share with our students is representative, making sure that our events that we're inviting families to are representative and not exclusionary. I can't, last year, my kiddo was school age for the first time, and I just cringed when our PTO sent out, a flyer for Muffins with Moms, those sorts of things that we can change so easily to make sure that more people can be involved and that all students feel like their families are wanted and accepted and represented. Sorry, I know that I'm like, my voice is escalating and I'm talking fast, but I'm really, passionate about it. I just think, we have to really examine everything we're doing for the equity in it. End of story. Go ahead, MK.
Yeah, and I feel that too, and I know a number of colleagues who feel similarly to me. And I think of like a book like All Are Welcome. I don't know how many are familiar with that book, but when even like a book like that is offensive to someone, it's like, how do you move on? How do you move forward from that point, I guess?
Well, and that's so rooted in this idea that, well, the queer community is somehow harming people, and combating that narrative, or when we're inclusive of populations that are harmful to people, because the idea that being queer is a choice, because you can't choose who you are, but there's this idea that queer people make a choice and they're choosing that lifestyle, and that lifestyle is harmful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it starts with combating those little bits of pieces of no, it's not. Why would anyone choose to be hated and ostracized by a society like that? Why, if it really were a choice, why would anyone choose to have to live like this? No one would. So there's that piece. But then also, I think more than anything, so many people are apprehensive about I don't even know where to begin with trying to make, I want to make things more inclusive. I want to make sure that I'm not excluding anybody or offending anybody or upsetting anybody. I don't know how I'm going to do that all the time in every way that I should be. Like, I just don't know. And so for those people that feel that way, because I don't know all the answers, there are plenty of ways that I impose harm and don't realize it. That's why I always consciously trying to be aware and look for the ways in which that's happening, but establishing an environment for students, families, friends, your own family, the community, to make yourself approachable to feedback is the key. Because no one of us is ever going to always know how to do this in every way that we need to. We need to be approachable. We need to create an environment where that family that was excluded or felt Muffins with Moms was a problem can come to me and say, hey, here's why it's problematic for my family, or here's why it's problematic for other families. What can we do about it? If you establish an environment in your classroom, in your agency, in your community, or just as yourself as a person where you can be approachable, you will be able to start finding those ways and making those changes and differences. And I promise, people remember how you made them feel, not always what you said, right? We have a hand and we don't have a name to it too. Rob, was that you? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's a really good point. Thanks so much.
Yeah. We have a hand from a phone number. Go for it.
I'm sorry, I must have entered, didn't enter my name. This is Chris. And I was a school psych for many, many years in Hempfield, and now I'm on the retired side and trying to advocate and for lots of different things with kids, but especially the topics we've talked about today. But to the two people, the person from York County that talked about the book banning, and also the man who just spoke, I think that your heart is in the right place. And so if you can take that heart, and I think you probably do put it in the climate of your class, that even if you're not allowed to use a particular book, that is just horrifying to me that they won't let you use certain literature, but that seems to be the going thing now. I think that the climate of your class and the way you interact with the kids and help them to interact with one another and respect each other is doing something and making yourself be, I know somebody had said earlier about a safe space, but you're not. It's like, I almost heard you saying, I can't put a flag up on my wall and say, it's okay to come here. But in a way, your approach or interaction with the kids has got to be felt. And I think also with your other colleagues, that maybe your group will start to grow and you will start to spread that kindness and acceptance with our little people in elementary, which is where most of my experience was. It just kind of happens naturally. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I think you are on the right track. And the person in York County, bless your heart. There are a lot of people behind you, not even just in this state, that we are working with as far as the book banning and all of that kind of thing, in fighting back and speaking out. So thank you for your advocacy. And I commend the students that got up and spoke and told their truths, because Hempfield, I don't know how big your school district is, but Hempfield is huge. And, kids do get up and did speak a little bit, but not a lot. And it's such a contentious environment, not only from people speaking, but also from the board themselves, that it to me doesn't seem like a place that I, as a teenager or a young person, would have been able to say my feelings about my truth, or my feelings about how it feels to be in that school. So that's all.
Yeah, no, excellent points. I think it reverberates right back to talking about how when you're accepting and open and create an environment as an individual where people can come to you and feel that you're approachable, that does so much more than people realize. And that's happening in Hempfield. I know it's happening in Hempfield. I know it's happening across the county and everywhere else. And they're the things that don't get screamed very loudly at board meetings. They're the things that don't get blasted in the media or seen all over social media. The loudest is not always the majority in that regard. There are so many people like all of you that are attending this that are doing things in your own little spaces and own little ways that are making such a bigger impact than probably any of you realize. And I applaud you, and keep doing it, whether you feel that immediate direct impact or not. I promise you, it's more meaningful than you realize. Every person that's approachable, every person that you can't protect kids from all the harm that's out there, but if you're somebody that's going to have their back and you're somebody that they can come to, you are safeguarding them and making them feel safe. And that goes way beyond the harmful thing that's said at the board meeting or the harmful thing posted on the internet, I promise you.
Yeah, and Chris mentioned something, and it just made me think that my very first class as a school psych, my professor talked about how our number one job was to be an advocate for children. The children are our number one stakeholder. And so I think it's not an easy time to be in education. That's an understatement. It's a scary time to be in education. And I want to thank all of our folks from the education realm who joined us today and who are doing this work, because I know that it's not easy. And I know that there's a lot of intimidation. So I just encourage you to continue to stay in this conversation with us, reach out to your partners. Every single one of our districts across Lancaster and Lebanon counties are doing this work. There are good people everywhere, and we just have to continue to push forward. And there's going to be noise, and there's going to be intimidation, and there's a motivation behind that, and we have to remember that, and we have to just keep doing what's right. And you're in good company. Go ahead, Parker.
I just want to throw in actually what Kate put in the chat that was from one of our participants, a teacher at Warwick who includes his pronouns in his work email signature, and that is a very subtle way to state he is open to other pronouns. And yeah, that is, I see a lot of people in our chats here did include their pronouns with their names, and that is just a great way to both show your support for a gender variant community and just normalize that practice. So it is very much appreciated. So anybody who wants to do a subtle support for the community, that's a real easy way. In your business signature, if you work at the schools, your schools, put that in your everyday signature to everybody.
I think we have Barry, and then we'll probably wrap up because we're over time, as we knew we would be. But thank you for hanging in there with us. Go ahead, Barry.
Hi, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Great. Thanks so much for having this. I just want to say I'm an older person. I identify as gay. In fact, yesterday I celebrated a milestone. And the only thing I'm going to say is that I now can get Medicare. So anyway, January 21st is a wonderful memory for me in many ways. 5 years ago, you may remember the powerful Women's March in DC. Which I was able to attend. But that's a little about me. I've been active in the community for about 15 years since I moved back to Lancaster. But anyway, what I would like to encourage folks, and I see at least one local school board member with us today, is the importance of elections, registrations, and getting out to vote. Today's topic is about supporting LGBTQ plus youth, and we've heard a lot over the past months about transgender youth and sports and that sort of thing. The difference that communication makes. I watched the Trump rally last week in Arizona. I do that. You need to hear what the other side is saying. And very shortly into his tirade, he talked about the transgender community in a derogatory way. So I just want to encourage people. It is important. Get out and vote. I've been active in the Democratic Party for quite a number of years, but the other thing that I do on election day, I've been a judge of elections for about 5 years. So I am bipartisan on that day. It is so important to get out and get people to vote. One statistic that I want to point out, and it's encouraging, is that to Lancaster County, as in Pennsylvania, Democrats are the majority registered voters. So in almost every precinct in Lancaster County, it only takes a small number of right-minded people, correct-minded people, like-minded people to change the outcome of the election. The other thing that I want to say, if you look at statistics, about 25% of the electorate really votes. So the people that you see on the school board are really not the majority. The loudmouths that are speaking out against equity and equality and inclusion are really not the majority. They have just spoken the loudest. So there's a primary coming up in May, a general election in November. This is a very important year. So if you want to reach out to me, Barry Russell on Facebook, it's very easy to register in Lancaster County. I am partisan, but I can encourage you that there are probably folks on the conservative side of the aisle that are moderate and encourage the things that we're talking about today. So thanks so much, and sorry for my dog in the background. She's telling me to. So thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Barry. Well, just to touch on that real quick, at our Pride event on June 19th this year, we will have registration to vote. There will be a booth to register to vote, nonpartisan, of course, but yes, registering to vote, taking care of all that, super, super important. So I'll let Kate and MK now wrap up.
Sorry, it's just responding to stuff in the chat. So, we're out of time for today, but we are here for you. Lititz Chooses Love is here for you. Let me go to our local org slide here so you can see who's available in your communities to continue the conversation, to support you, to answer questions, places that you can volunteer. So we've got Lititz Chooses Love, we've got Rivertown Pride Center doing amazing things over in Columbia, the Eastern PA Trans Equity Project, PA Youth Congress and Coalition for Trans Youth, and then our LGBTQ coalition down in Lancaster City. We're going to just continue this conversation, and I know that Lititz Chooses Love specifically has a couple of other speakers lined up for the next few weeks, so check out our Facebook page to sign up for those amazing speakers, and I'll give you our contact information should you want to reach out to MK and me. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Parker.
I'll just say real quick that our next presentation will be February 5th. It's going, or I'm sorry, actually February 2nd is first. Pastor Angie is going to be giving a talk on LGBTQ plus and religion. with another pastor who I'm forgetting his name right now. I'm so sorry. And then on the 5th, we will have a presentation from Planned Parenthood on how to acquire HRT from them. So that's going to be just a step-by-step guide to help anybody in this county and the rest of PA. They're doing a lot of telehealth to bring HRT to the transgender community. It's incredibly helpful. So I would love for them to, I am loving that they are going to come and explain to us all how we can do that with them.
Yeah, thank you all so much for attending. Please fill out the link for a handout if you so wish to have that. I will also make sure to include some of those questions for screening providers as part of that handout. If you are interested, please sign up for that and don't hesitate to reach out to any of us for further questions. Thank you all again for attending.
Have a great weekend. Stay warm.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
Thank
you.
you.
Love your shirt, by the way. I wanted to say that earlier.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been around the family for a few generations.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
It was mine.
Oh my God. Love
And it-
that.
And it went through a few pass downs.
Yep.
Nice.
Family
Thank
heirloom.
you.
The
Thank you so much.
leave button is not working.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you
And
for
Parker, I have
participating.
to say, I am